Good morning and welcome to this edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known on this Friday, February 18th, 2022. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said Thursday that it's reviewing its mask guidance, shifting its focus to COVID hospitalizations as a key measure of the severity of the outbreak and future guide for determining whether health safety protocols need to be tightened. As we come up on the 2-year anniversary of the pandemic, we're going to examine what we've learned, particularly as African Americans, lessons taught, lessons learned for Black people about America, race relations, and ourselves. Joining us this morning and joining us right now is Let It Be Known's correspondent and Washington and former journalist James Wright and the Indianapolis Recorder's Oseye Boyd. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
And so glad to have you. Before we get into the main topic this morning, we're going to go over a couple of headlines to start your morning. First up this morning, Minnesota prosecutors have apparently backed away from their pursuit of a longer than usual sentence for the suburban Minneapolis police officer who said she confused her handgun for her taser when she killed Daunte Wright, a 20-year-old Black motorist. Kim Potter is scheduled to be sentenced today following her December conviction of first-degree manslaughter. In a court filing this week, prosecutors said a sentence of slightly more than 7 years, which is the presumed penalty under the state's guidelines, would be proper. Potter's attorneys are asking for less than usual, including only probation under Minnesota law. Potter will be sentenced only on the most serious conviction of first-degree manslaughter. And state sentencing guidelines, James and Oseye, call for a penalty ranging from slightly more than 6 years to about 8.5 years, with the presumptive sentence being just over 7 years. Prosecutors initially argued that the aggravating factors warranted a sentence above the guideline range. Now they've backed off. So what do you think will happen this morning, Oseye, James?
Start with James.
I was actually going to say start with you, but I'll go ahead. Well, let me just say that I think that, and I stand by what I said a few months ago in terms of this. I believe that she did not intend to kill Daunte Wright. I thought she was very sloppy and unprofessional in terms of taking his life. She committed a criminal act. I believe she should get some years, Stacey, but I don't believe she should get the 6 years. But she should not get probation. She deserves some time behind bars to think about what she did. And so as a result, I believe that she deserves to serve time, but not too severely.
Well, Oseye, your thoughts on
here's my concern. If she gets less than 7 years, will she then have be up for parole possibility and only do half of her sentence? So possibly 3 years. So is that all the time she's going to get for killing this Black man? Yeah. I mean, again, I think this is where James and I we were last time. But where is the disparity for me is when we have Black people charged with lesser crimes and convicted, they spend more time in prison than this. She took a life. He can't come back. And so how then is this fair? How is this fair? That is my main issue, is the disparities. When we talk about how many people did I grow up with in the 90s who came of age in the 90s that did time for crack cocaine, that did years and years and years,
some still doing the time.
Some still doing the time. Some still doing time. How many people, have committed manslaughter that were Black, and it didn't matter their intent. They got decades and decades. So we're possibly talking just a few years. I mean, 3 years, she can do that in her sleep.
Yeah,
she's not going to think much about that.
And Oseye, we also, to your point, we have to remember too that situation was pretty much contained when she arrived, and the other officers there, they pretty much had it contained, and she decided to grab her gun. She says she mistook it. She thought it was a taser. She did yell out taser, But at that point, even a taser, you can argue, was not necessary. Joining us now, we see is the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Dr. Chavis, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Good morning and happy Friday to everybody. It's still Black History Month, and we're still making more Black history.
Absolutely. Also in the news this morning, Howard University and Presbyterian College officials reportedly have opened an investigation into racist slurs directed at the historically Black school's lacrosse team before a game in South Carolina this month. As Howard's all-Black team made its way inside Presbyterian's Bailey Memorial Stadium in Clinton, South Carolina, a group of white men verbally assaulted them. The coach says, our first steps onto the field, we were greeted with the F word and F Howard. You're not welcome here, they said. She says, we don't want, they said, they told the team, we don't want you here. They told us to go home. Coach Karen Healy-Silcott said the group used several racial slurs and derogatory sexual terms and called out players by their names. They shouted, if it ain't white, it ain't right. She says, we were looking at each other, wondering if we were actually hearing this. It's a shame. The team says that they entered the locker room and decided to concentrate on the game at hand. She says, this has been an incredible, difficult experience for myself and the players. It's not something they should have to face and not something they should have ever heard. It was a really terrible day. But she proclaimed that her players did persevere. And, you know, I will say this, editorializing, there is no strength like the strength of a Black woman, and the Black woman continued to be tested.
Well, absolutely. Well, again, this is 2022. Racism is just not in South Carolina. It's all over the United States. It's in sports. It's in healthcare. It's in the criminal justice system, as we just talked about. It is in the financial system. It's part of the sociology of America. We have not dismantled apartheid. And the dismantling of apartheid is just not in the legislatures. It's in the mindset. You know, apartheid has to be dismantled. White supremacy has to be dismantled in the mindset of too many Americans to still carry these racial hatreds, this racial prejudice, and this desire to keep Black people down.
Yeah. Well, our shout out to the Howard University lacrosse team. Those young ladies kept their heads up. They went out, they played. And they played a heck of a game, and they returned to Washington, D.C., and they are, from all accounts, just moving forward. Their eyes are squarely on the ball. So we shout out our HBCU young ladies at Howard. Also in the news this morning, in recognition of Black History Month and in celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Joint Economic Committee and the CBC released a new analysis of the impact of economic trends and barriers on Black Americans. State and national data spanning the last 50 years highlight significant areas of economic progress among Black Americans. However, the data also makes clear the persistence of structural and economic barriers facing Black workers and families that result in disparities across broad socioeconomic indicators and outcomes. According to the analysis, Black child poverty rates have been cut by nearly 1/2 since the 1980s, and the share of Black Americans living below the poverty line reached the lowest level since the federal data collection began in 1959. High school completion rates have risen significantly, and notably, the Black-white racial gap in high school graduation has nearly disappeared. In 2019, less than 6% of Black high school students dropped out of high school. The share of Black adults with college degrees has more than doubled since 1990. All really good news, but the CBC says despite this progress, white households still have 8 times the wealth of Black households, a result of historical disparities in asset ownership, unemployment, wages, and intergenerational wealth transfer. So it's a lot to unpack in this CBC report. Dr. Chavis, I know you always look at the positive. There's a lot of positives there. Oseye, I know you see some of the positives, but I know, Oseye, you probably are one to point out some of those negatives. So let's hear from you, girl.
How'd you know? Well, I think the report says what we already knew, right? we've made gains, but yet we're still so far behind. And so my concern is, as much as we make gains, why are we still, what was it, 8 times? The wealth gap is 8 times.
Mm-hmm.
What is going on there? If we're making gains, if we're moving out of poverty, if we're graduating high school, if we're going to college, what then is the issue that we still have this huge wealth gap? I mean, we're the hardworking people around, right? So
Yeah.
what is that? Those are my concerns. What is really going on here? What keeps fueling this disparity? What fuels our health disparities? What fuels all these things that just will not let us actually get to parity?
Yeah.
Well, Stacy, let me say this something on this. In the District of Columbia, it's worse. The black-white ratio in terms of income and wealth is 81% to 1 in terms of black people as opposed to white people as opposed to black people. In Ward 8, of which you are very familiar, the median income is $31,000 a year. But if you were to go a few miles to the west to Ward 2, the median income is $212,000. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is in, I understand what Oseye is saying, but this is the nation's capital where you allegedly have the largest group middle class group of black
Mm-hmm.
middle class people
Mm-hmm.
in the country. So I agree with Sister Boyd. Something is wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well,
I
we
agree.
obviously
I don't
Dr.
think we have a
Davis.
debate. I don't think we have a debate. There's definitely something is wrong. And the most egregious is in the economics. But we should also know that wealth is not one generation,
Yes.
it's intergenerational. And so whites are born with wealth. African Americans are born with poverty. Now, it can be turned around, but it's not going to be turned around in 5 years or 2 years or 1 year. And you look at the gentrification. I guarantee you there's a direct correlation of gentrification in DC with also increasing the wealth gap. You know, we have lost property. We are losing property. We've been displaced out of the District of Columbia. And after we're displaced, what happens? The property values goes up.
Yes.
You know, and so there is a systematic scheme at play that happens over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can it be reversed? Yes, but I think we have to have great intentionality. The benefit of the CBC report, it gives us a picture
Mm-hmm.
and a picture of blacks in America. You're always going to get some positive, some negative, and something in between. The
Mm-hmm.
question is, what are we going to do about it? I
Mm-hmm.
think we need more intention about closing the wealth gap in terms of strengthening African American owned businesses and getting more of our particular Generation Z and millennials to go into business for themselves. That's why the black press is so important. This is the 195th year of the black press in 2022. And as we approach the bicentennial of the black press, the 200th anniversary of the black press in just 5 years, we have to look at what has happened, not just in the last 50 years, but what has happened in the last 200 years
Mm-hmm.
of black people in America. And it's not a straight incline, it's not a
Mm-hmm.
straight decline. There have been peaks, there have been valleys. But one thing for sure, if we don't work on closing the wealth gap, that feeds all these other disparities. You know, even if you have a great education, if you don't have a way to bring in the income that matches your education, then that wealth gap is not going to be closed. So we have a lot of work to do. And let me just tie this to voting. Why do you think all the voter suppression is going on right now? Because if we lose these public policies, which is on the ballot, the wealth gap is on the ballot. We got to vote. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we need statehood in D.C. If we had statehood in D.C., we could James, we could turn around some of these negative statistics. And of course, the people who are opposed to statehood, they also know it. So we have a lot of work to do in 2022.
Yeah.
Not to get depressed with these statistics or this report, but it should serve as a motivating factor, as an agitating factor. We should get aroused. We should get even angry about these conditions so we can translate our anger and our rage into something positive that can create a situation where we overwhelm the voter suppressors and we begin to work on taking back our land, taking back our businesses, strengthening our young people so they can be the future heroes and sheroes of tomorrow.
Well, we have about 1 minute for our next topic before we move into the main topic. But James, this is really for you because Hollywood's been calling me, what does James Wright continue to talk about? So Tyler Perry decided to do this. He decided to create Medea J. Blige. And so, James, it's all on you.
Tyler Perry is such a talented man. He's a talented entrepreneur. I'm not really with the Medea thing, and I have never been with the Medea thing because many people know, and because of you, Stacey, I'm not with black men going into the entertainment industry, and in order to move up, they have to put on a dress. I'm really not with that because you don't see a lot of the white entertainers putting on dresses. You didn't see that with John Wayne. You didn't see that with Frank Sinatra. You didn't see that with Woody Allen. So why should ours have to do that in order to move forward?
James, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I'm only laughing because if anybody who knows this show and knows James at all, this has been a pet peeve of James, a stated pet peeve for a long time. So Greer and I decided, let's give James a little a little dig this morning by way of Tyler Perry. James, I hear you. There's been many of there's been some real big successes, black successes, where they have not put on a dress and makeup and lipstick and all that stuff. So it is your point is well taken. So thanks, James Wright. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said Thursday that it's reviewing its mask guide and shifting its focus to COVID hospitalizations as a key measure of the severity of the outbreak and future guide for determining whether health safety protocols need to be tightened. But as we come up on the 2-year anniversary of the pandemic, we examine what we've learned, particularly as African Americans, because that's what we have to focus on, right? Because we got to take care of our own lessons taught, lessons learned for Black people about Black America, race relations, and ourselves. So, Oseye, I'm going to start with you. What have we learned as Black Americans during this pandemic?
I think we relearned what you just said. It reinforced we have to take care of our own. We have to actually make sure that we are paying attention to our health, that we are getting tests, make sure that, we sign up for the test. One thing I did and my family members did when the test became available, we were sending the links out. Hey, get the test. Make sure you get your test. We have to do those things. Everyone's not paying attention. Everyone's not aware. So we have to make sure we keep an eye on our people to make sure they have the access to this information, because we know oftentimes we're the last one to get the access to something.
Yeah,
it's going to
James,
benefit us.
Oh, I'm sorry, Oseye.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On you. James, we have to look in the mirror, right? It's important that everybody looks in the mirror. Every morning we get up, we look in the mirror. So when we look in the mirror, when you think about COVID, as a Black man, James, what comes to mind? These last 2 years, they haven't been easy. But again, the African-American experience has not been easy.
Well, we are survivors. Not only do we survive, we thrive. A number of Black businesses have been started since this pandemic has come into fruition. And but this is not unusual for us because we survived the Spanish flu about 100 years ago. And, and this is interesting that you say this, Stacey, because I operate in some spaces that talks about if you get vaccinated, you will have a microchip put in you and 666 and the Antichrist and all that type of good stuff. But we have to stick with the science and we have to stick with the facts in order to beat this disease. And we can snuff out this disease, and we as a people can do it, but we have to have the proper information.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Dr. Chavis, I know that you have seen it all. But Dr. Chavis's glass is never half empty. So Dr. Chavis, what's the takeaway so far for Black America during this pandemic?
I think there are 3 takeaways. First, you recall the NMPA early on established the NEPA Coronavirus Task Force, led by Dr. James Hildreth, the distinguished president of the Mehari Medical College in Nashville, but he also serves on the FDA approval committee. And one of the things that we found was, one of the things we learned, number one, is we need more African Americans in the healthcare system. We need more African American doctors, more African American researchers, nurses. And guess what? The healthcare industry is growing. They're looking for talented people to hire. So number one, we have to have more of our brothers and sisters take leadership role in the healthcare industry. Number two, we learned something that James Wright just said, we got to stop going for the okadoke. Too many of us are following rumors, innuendo, the absence of science. We have to pay attention. We are African people are the original scientists. So when people come at you with something that's not based on science, that's antithetical to who we are as a people.
That's right.
Then number three, I think that we should see the connection between health and economics, connection between health and sustainability. I think COVID has taught all of us, all of our families, and our communities, how vital healthcare. Remember the argument when Obamacare was being debated. I have people in the healthcare industry in my family. My sister, who's a doctor, told me that after the Affordable Care Act was passed, she saw people that came to get healthcare that had never gone to the doctor before, ever in their life. Too many Black people wait till they're sicker than sick, and then have to go to the emergency room for healthcare because of the absence of insurance. So I think that those are three takeaways, Stacey, that we've learned from the coronavirus.
Yeah, David Youngblood writes in that what I've learned in the pandemic, and I'm not sure where David lives, and we don't want to put it on the air anyway, but he says, my neighbors, he learned that his neighbors do not care one iota for me and mine. But, you know, that, and I don't know if it's a black-white thing, but that's where I'm going, Oseye. As far as race, we saw what happened with in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, right? Seems like there was this groundswell of support for Black Lives Matter, and that has dissipated basically, right? So what have we learned about race in America in these past 2 years?
Well, I think we've learned that we really weren't where we thought we were. I think we really thought we had come a long way and we were much more united than we are. It was really a rude awakening to see just how people felt about you and just how loud and proud they were to tell you how they felt about you. We saw that people, you know, fighting over mask mandates. You know, now we're fighting over CRT. We have bills all over the country about CRT that's not even in schools. We're debating about that in Indiana. So the unification that we thought, like I said, is just not there. We are really trying to be as divided as possible now, with the idea of when we talk about race, the idea there is that we're the ones dividing the country. We're the dividers. Yeah. And that's so false.
James, same question.
I have to agree with what Oseye just said. I think a lot of people were shocked in terms of the George Floyd situation, because we thought that, Obama was elected and we have so many members of the Black Caucus and everybody loves Black people and everything is wonderful. And we were just shocked. But really, this is nothing new because it just came out up front because of social media. I think we have to have a reality check. We as Black people need a reality check that we need to come together. We really need to come together and stop with this false narrative that America is this great country that is accepting of us, because it is not. It really is not at this time.
Well, Bobby Henry says he learned, he says, what I learned was what I really don't need. But, you know, it's interesting too, Dr. Chavis, that as I mentioned, in the aftermath of George Floyd, we saw this groundswell from corporate America, global businesses. They expressed this desire to support. Some did, and then some immediately didn't, immediately pulled back their support when things sort of died down. So it seems like you have to seize the moment. I think we understand about seizing the moment, but you have to seize a moment, especially being a Black American. When that opportunity presents itself, you really have to snag it. That's what it seems like one of the lessons that has been taught in these past 2 years.
Yes, well, I think Reverend Dr. Barber would say that in seizing a moment, we need to change a moment into a movement. And I think that the freedom movement just didn't start in the 1960s. We refer to it as the civil rights movement. We've been struggling for freedom since 1519. And I think that our unity, our consistency, our consciousness, we need a much broader period where we can see the connecting of our movements. I'm talking now, everybody thought that the halftime show at the Super Bowl was so great because it was hip hop. But you know, the truth of the matter is, hip hop itself emerged out of a context. We would never have hip hop if it hadn't been for Motown, R&B, jazz, soul, gospel. You know, so we see these moments, but I think it's important to see the connection between the moments, of what happens between the moments. And something that James said, where's our ongoing freedom movement? We got to keep pushing. And believe me, I'm pleased to announce to the audience that there's plenty of room in the freedom movement. It's not overcrowded.
And well, if I could piggyback on that, I think that's one of our weaknesses. We don't keep it moving. We don't stay focused. We think, oh, we made it, and we stop.
That's right.
You know, and we never stop. And I also just want to say too, just really quickly, one of the ways I believe we need to fight is for reparations. I think that needs to be on the table all the time. I think that's how we end that wealth gap. That's how we get to parity, is reparations. I've been a believer of reparations since college. I just want to plug reparations.
Yeah, well, Royce Roberts writes.
Yeah. And then also with reparations comes education, because one of the concerns, dear sister, is that if we don't work on our ongoing consciousness, even if we all receive reparations, and a few weeks later we would have given the money right back to the oppressor. Because we need we talk about white people need to change their mindset. Black people, we need to change our mindset also. The truth of the matter is, we are all, and I know this maybe sound a little controversial, there's one humanity. You know, and the problem with racism and bigotry and hatred is the notion that there's more than one humanity. That there's a white humanity, there's a Black humanity, there's a Latino humanity, there's Asian. There are different cultures, but there's only one humanity. And until we learn and affirm that at the end of the day, we learn from the history, don't have to repeat it. There's a commonality among all of us, no matter what skin color. But the problem is, we've been miseducated, not just we, our society's been miseducated, and we see each other as enemies, not as brothers and sisters.
Yeah, and I just have to, before we close, have to lift up Royce Roberts. I was trying to lift up Royce Roberts' comment that each generation will have its struggle in this country always. Just real quick, 30 seconds or less, please. Oseye and then James. Yeah, final thoughts.
Again, we just have to keep pushing. We can't drop the ball. We can't get satisfied with a little bit of progress and think we've actually done something. I mean, until we are actually at parity, the work is not done. The work is not done until racism, white supremacy is ended. Our work is not done. It is a fight. It's the good fight. It's exhausting, but I can't think of anything better that we should do as Black people, for the country, actually, for America.
James?
Yeah, thank you, Stacey. The COVID-19 era has taught us that racism hasn't gone away. It's just exposed it at a different level. And now that it's been exposed at a different level, it is on to us. It is up to us to try to confront it and put a stop to it.
Well, each generation will have his own struggle, Royce Roberts. You're right. I think that sums it up pretty well. Oseye Boyd of the Indianapolis Record, is always a privilege to have you. And James Wright, our favorite correspondent from the Washington Informer. We won't see James in a dress anytime soon or sometime later. So we appreciate James. And of course, the dynamic president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. They're always busy, Dr. Chavez. We certainly appreciate you. Thank you all for watching. Have a great weekend. Stay well and stay safe, and we'll see you on Monday.